Hi fifth graders, welcome to our video about the Puritans. Here are some friendly reminders of things that we've been talking about, and a little bit of preview about some information you'll learn in this lesson. You know that the Pilgrims came to Plymouth in 1620 from England, seeking religious freedom. But 10 years later, a separate group came to Boston, and they're known as the Puritans. Puritans and Pilgrims are not the same thing. I know. Basically, the Pilgrims were a form of Puritans, but the Puritans were a separate group. So that's why on this map you can see that the colonies are two separate places. Okay? Puritans are going to be the ones who settle Massachusetts Bay, New Hampshire, and eventually Connecticut. Okay? In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the founding of Rhode Island, which some of you know about already from our Colonial Billboard project, but I want to give you a little bit more information about that, about Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson, along with some more information about Massachusetts Bay. You'll be making 3 vocabulary cards tonight, so make sure you bring them into class tomorrow. The leader of the Puritans was a man named John Winthrop. You probably recognize the name Winthrop from the town. He brought the Puritans here in 1630 and would be the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He's famous for this quote, "For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. Their eyes of all people are upon us." Oops, that should say there. Why that's important is because the Puritans felt like they were the models of Christian living and that everyone should look up to them as they lived a city upon a hill. The Puritans were very dedicated to their religion. And you know, I think from the lesson that we previewed today in class, that for the Puritans, let's see if this works. Yes. That church equaled government and government equaled church. So they were one and the same. If you had an issue with one, you had an issue with the other. And that's going to cause some problems for some later Puritans. The Puritans are going to be the ones to establish the villages in and around Boston and Salem. And by 1639, we have the first English people living right here in Reading. Native Americans, of course, had lived here for thousands of years before, but the first English moved out from Lynn. A Puritan village would have similar structures, including a meeting house. We're going to look at this in the textbook tomorrow. A meeting house was very important as it served several roles for the people. It was where church services were held on the weekends. These church services often took up most of the day and often with a break for lunch. Town business was also discussed there on different days, and everyone in town could attend to listen to a town meeting. Did you know that Reading and many other local towns still hold town meetings to vote on town business today? Reading's is kind of unique, and we'll talk a little bit about their structure later. What is it called when people start to have a say in their own decision making? Do you remember the vocabulary word? I hope you remember self-rule. Not everyone could vote. At first you had to be a male and a member of the Puritan Church in Massachusetts, but by the end of the 1600s, any man who owned property could vote. I want you to keep that statement, property, in mind, and I think I've mentioned in class that not everything you think of counts as property, and that something surprising might count as property. Up here, I want to mention that this picture is the old Methodist Church right in downtown Reading. I don't believe that was the meeting house in colonial times, but it certainly represents the way the building might have looked, and the area it's in front of it is kind of like the common. This inside picture is actually from the meeting house in Sandown, New Hampshire, but I love that it shows you what it would have looked like, and it looks very much like the building that we're going to go to on our field trip in Boston called the Old South Meeting House. You notice that these boxes is where people would have sat for church services, and that the reason why they were so high was actually to keep people warm. And you'll notice that you would hope you would have one of these closer boxes. You might have been a fancy family, or if you had one of these upstairs versions. Okay? We'll talk more about this in class, but town meeting is going to be one of our important vocabulary words. Now, I mentioned that there are some Puritans who don't always get along and don't always follow the rules, and Roger Williams was one of them. He was a Puritan minister who moved with his family from England to Salem in 1631. He was very popular and very well liked, and he believed that beliefs that the church and the government should be separate. You can imagine that this made him probably pretty unpopular with the church government in Boston. And the governor at that point was actually with John Winthrop. So what happens is Roger Williams is asked nicely to leave, and in fact he's expelled from the colony. He's kind of chased out, and he makes his way to Rhode Island, where he meets up with the Narragansett Indians, and he has a wonderful relationship with them and is very fair to them and creates his colony with true religious freedom there. He'll be joined later by another former Massachusetts Puritan, That other Puritan is Anne Hutchinson. She came originally from England as well, and she held meetings at her house where she encouraged people to talk about church and their feelings about the Bible. She questioned the teachings of the Puritan leaders, whether church and government should be the same. And as you can imagine, the same issues for her as it did for Roger Williams. That she should not have been questioning the leaders, or at least that's how they felt. She felt like it was fine to have people talking about God, talking about the Bible, talking about church that day, while the Puritans felt like people should just believe what they're told. She was actually put on trial for her beliefs, and this is what the picture actually goes with here, and she maintained that she broke no laws and she did nothing wrong. At the end of this video, you'll see that I left you a link, and it's actually the transcript, the real words that were said between Anne Hutchinson and John Winthrop, and it's kind of funny to read because you're going to see how kind of tough she was and how she really tried to hold her own with the Puritan leaders. Like Roger Williams, she's expelled from Massachusetts, forced to leave, and founds her own colony in Rhode Island that later merges with Roger Williams to become one larger Rhode Island, with real religious freedom. Okay, so the last thing you need to do tonight is make 3 vocabulary cards. You have 3 terms: town meeting, Puritan, expel. Notice that Puritan is capitalized. You should write this on the front of the card. You should write this definition on the back of the card. Feel free to pause and write these down now, and make sure you bring them to class tomorrow.